A $200 raised bed kit. 2 people. Same store, same weekend, same step-by-step assembly guide. 3 years later, one of them is giving zucchini away to neighbors who don't even garden. The other just tore everything out. 3 seasons of weak harvests, stunted plants, and seed packets that never got opened. Same kit, same seed catalog. The only difference was a set of decisions most people don't know they're making before the first seedling ever goes in. If you're setting up raised beds for the first time, or you've had them long enough to wonder why the results never matched the effort, this list is the dividing line. There are 9 specific mistakes that account for the majority of raised bed failures in the U.S., and most of them happen before a single plant ever goes in the ground. Here's the full list, starting with the one mistake that is physically impossible to undo once your beds are already built. Mistake number 9. The only fix that becomes impossible the moment your bed is filled. This is the only mistake on this entire list that you physically cannot fix once your beds are already sitting in the ground. And it's the one almost nobody talks about until after it's too late. Once a raised bed is filled and planted, adding wire mesh underneath means emptying all the soil out, laying down the hardware cloth, and filling the whole thing back up. There's no workaround. You're essentially rebuilding from scratch, which is exactly why people skip it and why they regret it. The reason wire mesh matters depends on which animal is actually getting into your beds, and most people assume that's one problem with one solution. Pocket gophers, specifically Tomamis species in the western U.S. and Geomis species in the east, don't stumble across your raised bed by accident. They navigate underground by following chemical signals. Plant roots release organic compounds into the surrounding soil, and those signals travel. In a raised bed packed with loose compost and aerated growing mix, those compounds spread faster than they would through compacted native soil. You're not just building a raised bed. You're building an underground advertisement pointing directly at every gopher tunnel in your yard. Moles are a different situation. Eastern moles, Scalopus aquaticus, and western moles in the Scapanus genus are not after your roots. They eat earthworms and grubs. Compost-rich soil supports far more earthworms than the surrounding ground, so moles tunnel in to feed. Root damage is the side effect of their digging, not the goal. That distinction matters because the solutions are completely different. Voles are a third situation. Microtus species don't dig their own entry points. They travel through tunnels left by moles, or through gaps where your bed wall meets the ground. A mesh floor alone won't stop them. The fix is galvanized hardware cloth with a 1/4-inch opening, not 1/2 inch. Juvenile gophers and voles pass through a 1/2 inch grid without slowing down. Lay the mesh flat before any soil goes in. Bend the edges up about 2 inches along the inside of the bed walls. That bend closes the gap voles use at the corners. For a standard 4 by 8 foot bed, the total material cost runs around $15 to $25. When it comes to decisions that can't be undone once your beds are built, this one is first. The next one, the layout of your garden, goes wrong in an entirely different way, and it affects every single day you go out there to use it. Mistake number 8. Optimizing for how the garden looks instead of how it actually works. Most layout mistakes happen on paper, because the person designing the garden has never actually tried to use it. The default error is optimizing how many beds fit into the available space. It looks efficient on a diagram. The problem shows up the first time you actually try to work in it. Start with bed width. 4 feet is the number most people quote. But the real question is, can you reach the center of the bed from either side without stepping in? For most people, 4 feet is right at that limit. If your reach is shorter, 3.5 feet is the safer number. There's no fixed answer. There's a body test. Path width is where the most common mistakes happen. An 18 to 20 inch path looks reasonable before anything is planted. By midsummer, when plants are sprawling over both edges, that same path is down to 10 or 12 inches of actual walkable space. The test worth running before you commit is the wheelbarrow test. If you can't push a loaded wheelbarrow through with both hands on the handles, the tasks that need one will gradually stop getting done. The minimum that actually works is 24 inches of clear space when beds are empty, which leaves around 18 inches when plants are at their fullest. Before any material goes in the ground, lay out the full shape with a garden hose or stakes and string. Walk every path. Kneel at the center of each bed. Carry a bucket of water through the narrowest gap. That is the real test, not a sketch on paper. The mistake in layout isn't placing beds in the wrong spot. It's designing for how the garden looks in a photo, instead of how it works every day you're actually out there. Mistake number 7. 6 inches is enough, but only under one condition. Almost no one checks. 6 inches gets mentioned everywhere as the standard for raised beds. But that number is only correct if you never look at what's underneath. When native soil below the bed is loose and workable, 6 inches is actually fine. Roots grow down through the bed floor and keep going. The bed is just the top portion of a much larger root zone. When the soil underneath is compacted clay, caliche, hardpan, or concrete, it stops working entirely. Now 6 inches is all the growing space those roots will ever have. The difference matters most with what you plan to grow. Lettuce, spinach, and most herbs do fine at 6 to 8 inches. Tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant need 12 to 18 inches to develop properly. Carrots and parsnips need 12 to 16 inches of unobstructed vertical space because they cannot redirect around a hard barrier mid-root. Squash and cucumber push past 18 inches. Depth matters for something else that rarely gets mentioned, and it has nothing to do with roots. Trellises, tomato cages, and teepee poles need at least 10 to 12 inches of soil depth to stay stable when a plant reaches full height and the wind picks up. In a 6-inch bed, the post only has a few inches of grip. By late summer, when a tomato plant hits 5 feet and starts carrying weight, that support is going to shift. If your beds are already built and running shallow, the solution depends on what they're made from. Wooden beds can take an additional course of boards before the next season starts. Most metal bed brands sell extension kits for this purpose. The new baseline worth building toward is 10 to 12 inches for general growing, and 14 to 17 inches if you're planting deep-rooted crops or anything requiring vertical support. The first season usually looks fine. Young roots haven't reached the bottom yet. The problem tends to arrive in year 2 or 3, when the root system fills out and has nowhere left to go. Mistake number 6. A decision most people make in 5 minutes that plays out over 20 years. The material you choose for your raised beds is a 20-year decision, and most people make it based on what looks good in someone else's backyard video. Most people pick a bed material because it looks good in photos, costs the least up front, or because someone they watch online uses it. None of those predict how it holds up 5 years from now. Untreated wood costs the least to start and is easy to cut into any shape. How long it lasts depends on where you live. Douglas fir runs 4 to 6 years in humid climates like the Pacific Northwest or Southeast. Cedar holds 8 to 12 years. Treating with linseed oil or charring the exterior using the shusugiban method from Japan adds 3 to 5 years to either without much expense. Metal beds with powder-coated steel last 20 to 30 years. The upfront cost is higher, but the price per year usually runs lower. One detail matters specifically in hot climates. Steel's thermal conductivity is around 50 watts per meter Kelvin. Wood's is 0.12. That gap is roughly 400 times. In places like Phoenix or Las Vegas, when air temperatures reach 100 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, the inner surface of a metal bed wall can hit 140 degrees. The soil in the 2 to 3 inch zone nearest that wall gets hot enough that roots stop taking in water. The plant wilts, even though the soil is wet. A shade cloth on the west-facing side, or a lighter panel color, handles that. Fabric grow bags work well for small spaces or balcony setups. Roots self-prune when they reach the fabric instead of circling, which produces denser branching and avoids root-bound plants. Cinder blocks don't rot and stack as high as you need. Fresh concrete raises soil pH in year 1. The question most people ask is wood or metal? A better one is, will you still be here in 10 years? Whether you want the flexibility to rearrange later, and what the full cost adds up to. Mistake number 5. Cutting corners on the most expensive step creates the most expensive problems. Filling a raised bed is the most expensive single step in the entire process, which is exactly why it's where most of the worst decisions get made. A 4 by 8 foot bed at 17 inches deep holds about 28 cubic feet of material. Fill that premium bagged soil from Home Depot or Lowe's at $1.50 to $2 per gallon, and one bed runs $200 to $350. That's the number that sends people looking for shortcuts. The most common one is putting wood or branches at the bottom to take up space and reduce how much soil you need to buy. Most advice online sorts this into 2 camps. It's either completely wrong or completely fine. Neither is accurate. When wood decomposes, the bacteria and fungi doing that work need nitrogen to finish the process. If the surrounding soil doesn't have enough, they pull from whatever is available, including the zone where roots are actively growing. This is called nitrogen immobilization, and it doesn't happen evenly across the bed. It happens at the contact point with the decomposing material. That location is what actually matters. In beds under 10 inches deep, skip wood entirely. The growing zone and the decay zone are the same zone. In beds between 14 and 18 inches, small diameter twigs and branches placed in the bottom third are workable. There's enough soil above to keep roots clear of the active breakdown area. In beds 20 inches or deeper, a fully layered approach makes sense, placing the largest pieces at the bottom and working progressively smaller toward the top. This is the core of hugelkultur, a method Austrian farmer Sepp Holzer documented and practiced extensively. At that depth, decomposing wood also develops habitat for mycorrhizal fungi. The problem was never wood. It was the wrong wood in a bed that wasn't deep enough to use it. A different issue comes from high-salt composts. Mushroom compost and some commercial blends carry elevated electrical conductivity, which measures total dissolved salt concentration. When that number exceeds 4.0 millisiemens per centimeter, osmotic pressure outside young root cells prevents them from taking in water. The plant wilts, even though the soil is wet. Using 100% mushroom compost is a gamble on a number you can't see from the bag label. The mix that consistently works is 60% topsoil or raised bed mix, 30% compost, and 10% perlite. Bulk topsoil from a local landscape supply yard runs $25 to $40 per cubic yard. Municipal compost is available free or at low cost in many U.S. cities. A large bag of perlite from a hardware store costs $20 to $25. That combination brings the per-gallon price down to 30 cents to 60 cents, compared to $1.50 to $2 for bagged products. This mistake isn't about picking the wrong ingredient. It's about letting the price decide the quality instead of starting from what the plants actually need and working from there. Mistake number 4. Why yields drop in year 2 and adding fertilizer never fixes it. Raised bed soil doesn't disappear overnight. It leaves in 3 quiet ways that add up to 2 to 4 inches of lost volume every single growing season. The first is decomposition. As organic matter in the soil breaks down, the physical volume shrinks. That process is good for fertility, but it means the level inside the bed drops year over year. The second is watering pressure. The force of water hitting the surface compresses soil particles gradually over time. The third is harvest removal. When you pull a full root ball out of the bed, carrots, parsnips, beets, a small amount of soil comes with it. Over 9 or 10 seasons, that accumulates. The symptom that catches people off guard is a drop in yield starting in year 2 or 3. Most growers respond by adding more fertilizer. When that doesn't improve things, they switch to something else. The actual cause is the soil volume and organic matter percentage declining, not a nutrient deficiency. The repair is straightforward. Add 2 to 3 inches of compost or raised bed mix across the top at the beginning of each growing year. No digging required. Earthworms and regular watering will move it downward through the season on their own. Either early spring before planting or fall after the last harvest works. There's a benefit to this that seems like it shouldn't be possible. Every time you add organic matter to the bed, it holds water better and drains better at the same time. That's not a contradiction. Organic matter creates the pore space that allows both to happen simultaneously. Mistake number 3. 3 things draining your bed every single day while you are not watching. Bare soil in a raised bed isn't neutral. It's actively costing you water, organic matter, and weed control at the same time. Every day you skip the mulch. The moisture loss alone is significant. Uncovered soil in the same conditions loses up to 70% more water to evaporation than mulched soil. After an identical rain event, soil under 2 inches of straw stays damp for 2 to 3 days. Bare soil dries out in about 6 hours. You're spending more water and more time on losses that don't have to happen. The second problem runs quietly. Ultraviolet light breaks down organic matter at the top layer of the bed, which is the part that took the most time to build. Weed germination is the third. Weed seeds need light to sprout. Cover the soil and you remove that condition. A mulched bed won't be completely weed-free, but the workload drops significantly. Straw is the most practical general-purpose choice and runs $8 to $12 per bale at most U.S. farm stores. 1 bale covers a 4 by 8 foot bed at about 3 inches deep. One distinction that matters. Straw is the dried stalk left after grain harvest. Hay still contains seeds. Using hay introduces exactly what you're trying to block. In wet climates like the Pacific Northwest, straw also encourages slugs, so arborist wood chips are a better option. These come free through chipdrop.com by connecting with local tree services, though wait times vary. Grass clippings work too, but limit the layer to 1 inch or less to avoid matting. On wood chips, the nitrogen concern only applies when chips are dug into the soil. As a surface layer, they have no direct contact with the active root zone, so that issue doesn't arise. Leaving soil bare isn't saving you anything. It's a daily withdrawal from what you've already put in. Mistake number 2. The 20 minutes skipped in October that show up in your results in May. By the time the last harvest is done, most gardeners are exhausted, and the 20 minutes it takes to protect the beds before winter feels like a lot more than it is. That's the reality of this mistake. After 6 or more months of planting, tending, and harvesting, the energy to do one more task at the end of the season simply isn't there. So the beds sit open through the cold months. Rain erodes soil structure out of the bed. Freeze-thaw cycles break apart the aggregate structure you spent a growing year building. By spring, the soil is denser, harder to work, and slower to warm. A 3 to 4 inch mulch layer handles all of this for any climate zone. Put it down after the final harvest, and earthworms keep working underneath through the cold months. So the soil arrives at spring in much better shape. For cover crops, the right choice depends on your USDA hardiness zone. Zones 3 through 5, Minnesota, Michigan, and Vermont. Winter rye, Secale cereale, tolerates down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit and goes in 6 weeks before your first frost date. Zones 6 and 7, Virginia, Oregon, Tennessee. Crimson clover, Trifolium incarnatum, builds nitrogen in the soil and dies back naturally in spring. Zones 8 through 10, California, Texas, Florida. A mulch layer is usually enough, or plant spinach or kale as a living cover. The next growing season starts in October, not March. Mistake number 1. The step that tells you whether everything else you have done actually works. Every doctor runs blood work before writing a prescription. Your raised bed deserves the same standard, and right now, almost nobody gives it that. Gardening still works the way medicine did before the 19th century. Observe a symptom, guess at a cause, try a treatment. Plant isn't growing. Add fertilizer. That doesn't help. Try a different kind. Then add more water. Then compost. Not once in that sequence does anyone stop to ask what's actually wrong. Modern medicine changed that with one move. Measure before treating. Blood work before prescribing. X-ray before setting the bone. Soil works the same way. The difference is that gardeners almost never run the test. 4 things are happening in your soil right now that you cannot see. The first is pH. Most vegetables need a reading between 6.0 and 7.0. At pH 5.0, a bed can be loaded with nitrogen and the plant still can't access calcium or magnesium. The nutrients are there. The chemistry blocks them. The second is EC, a measure of total salt dissolved in the soil. When it passes 4.0 millisiemens per centimeter, the concentration outside young root cells is higher than inside, and the roots can't draw water in, even from wet soil. Some commercial composts, including mushroom compost, regularly come in above that number. A handheld EC meter costs $15 to $20 on Amazon. The third is the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium balance. Each deficiency shows differently. Nitrogen shortage yellows the oldest leaves first. Phosphorus turns them purple, and low potassium burns the edges. Visual symptoms point you toward a problem. A test tells you what to do about it. The fourth is everything the test picks up that you wouldn't think to check. Buffer pH, organic matter percentage, and micronutrient levels, all invisible without measuring. 2 options work for U.S. gardeners. A 4-in-1 home kit from Home Depot, Lowe's, or Amazon runs $12 to $20 and gives pH plus NPK results by color comparison in under 15 minutes. A university extension soil lab through the USDA Extension Service costs $15 to $30 per sample and comes back with specific amendment amounts, not just a list of deficiencies. Run a test before filling any new bed. Once, at the start, run one before any season where the previous year came up short. Run one after adding an amendment from a source you haven't used before. Every other mistake on this list is about the physical setup of the beds. The wire mesh, the layout, the depth, the fill, the mulch. Those are all decisions about what goes where. A soil test is different. It's the step that tells you what you're building on before you build anything. Skip it, and you're guessing at the inside while getting everything on the outside right. A $12 test can answer what 3 years of adding fertilizer couldn't. Before you do anything else today, order a 4-in-1 soil test kit online, or pull up the USDA Extension Service directory to find your state's lab and request a sample bag. Most of these 9 mistakes cost nothing to avoid if you catch them before you build. They cost a full season, sometimes more if you don't. The decisions that matter most happen before the first plant ever goes in the ground, and now you know exactly what they are. If any of this saved you from making one of these mistakes before your beds go in, that's exactly the kind of video I make here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.